one of his last missions. But I and a group of entrepreneurs had suggested that perhaps NASA could lease the Columbia for $1 if the cost of operating it and launching it could be raised by private enterprise. So, short of parking it somewhere in a museum or somewhere else, it could have useful life.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Hope to get a seat if that does happen. Thanks so much, Joanne Borenkos.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, coming up in a couple of minutes, we report from the country where the first wave of discontent began. But not everyone in Tunisia feels they have benefited from the toppling of the old regime. More on that when we come back.
East Timor's government has declared it's time for foreign forces to leave the country. But with a frail infrastructure, is this nation prepared to face a future without international support? 101 East, at this time on Al Jazeera.
As geeks take on dictators, bloggers turn dissidents, and social networks root for social justice, governments are going cyber, spying on their citizens, erecting firewalls like iron curtains and closing down websites. We ask, is cyber-generated change virtual or real? Empire at this time on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera focused as the troops pulled out. We focused when barriers were built and walls came down.
Women have been voted into parliament.
On the raising of one voice and the silencing of another.
Somebody knew he was coming.
We focused when bombs fell.
Gotta go.
And when Gaza stood alone. Throughout the Middle East, we focus on news and documentaries that matter to you. Al Jazeera, television that truly inspires.
Unpopular with some at home, untested overseas. The first year has not been easy for David Cameron and his coalition government. In conjunction with YouTube, Al Jazeera asks your questions to the British Prime Minister. World View, an interview with David Cameron at this time on Al Jazeera.
The Golan Heights, one of the spoils of the 1967 war, home to 20,000 Israelis and source of 1/3 of all Israel's water. But what of the Syrians left behind? With families torn apart and all borders closed, they come to talk to their loved ones across the Shouting Valley. Across the Shouting Valley on Al Jazeera.
It's 5:30 GMT. I'm Sami Zaidan, and these are your top stories on Al Jazeera. Libya's embattled leader is blaming Al-Qaeda for fueling the uprising against him. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi made the claim during a second televised address to the nation, this time by phone. Well, there's growing evidence the country is slipping from its grasp. More pictures are emerging of anti-government protesters claiming control of areas in the east. And tens of thousands of foreign nationals and Libyans alike are heading out of the country to escape the unrest. Well, let's run through developments on the ground in Libya now. There's been heavy fighting just west of the capital Tripoli between opposition forces and Gaddafi loyalists. There have also been more resignations by members of Gaddafi's government. Libya's ambassador to Jordan is the latest diplomat to quit in protest over the violence. Gaddafi's opponents are now reporting gains in the west, with police and soldiers reportedly deserting Gaddafi's regime in the town of Zuwara. Lawrence Lee has more.
The latest town to experience heavy fighting isn't very far from Tripoli, and that perhaps explains why protesters from Zawiya have told Al Jazeera that the army came to the town and opened fire on them with heavy artillery, their hunting rifles no match. Witnesses said at least 100 were killed, and they expected the army to return after dark.
We asked them to stop all their fires, but they didn't reply. The shooting was direct to the people. They shot the people in the head and in the chest, direct. So they were trying to kill the people, not terrifying them.
If that's one version of events, the other came from Gaddafi himself. He turned up by telephone on Libyan television with a message to Azawiya. He said the town had been infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, drugs and madness.
The demands come from bin Laden. You Azawiya people are substituting the popular and Jamahiriya system with bin Laden. Bin Laden cells have been operating here for months. His operatives are provoking and brainwashing your children, inciting them to launch attacks. The enemy perpetrating the killings of our children, operating from mosques or elsewhere. Bin Laden and his operatives are providing your children with hallucination pills. Those are the true perpetrators. Arrest them and bring them to court.
The Gaddafis are certainly not short of opinions on what's happening in their country. While his father was blaming Al-Qaeda and drugs for the revolts, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi once again accusing the outside media of invention and lies.
We have to understand that the conspiracy against us is not coming from Libyans. It is coming from our Arab brothers. They have used their media to spread lies and deception. Tomorrow, all media is coming and they will film everything. There is also an investigation committee, which includes foreigners. You will discover that we were deceived. You will find that this was the biggest lie to Libyans in our history.
As well as all these observations from the Gaddafis, Libyan TV has been showing other pictures aimed at putting the fear into the opposition. It isn't clear whether these men are alive or dead, though at least one is still moving. There was a message as well: give all your weapons in and we won't harm you. It's unlikely to be believed by the protesters. It's hardly surprising the government wants the opposition to agree to a weapons amnesty. These images from Misrata in the west, said to be the scene of new fighting after falling to the opposition, suggest the uprising has as many heavy weapons as the army. During his latest address, Gaddafi offered the opinion that Libya's tribal leaders, some of whom have been meeting in Al-Baida, should be taking more responsibility for local government and controlling their young people, though here they said they were more interested in the United Nations coming to save them. Gaddafi said he himself had become more of a symbolic leader of Libya.
As the Arab proverb says, if you carry a leaking water bag, it will make your back wet, and it is your responsibility. It is none of my concern anymore.
This was an address different in tone and content to his speech of Tuesday night. Wishful thinkers might hope it sounded almost valedictory. Or perhaps in arguing that he isn't really leader and therefore isn't in charge, it was simply a denial of responsibility.
May peace be on Zawiya and its people.
Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Well, tribal leaders in eastern Libya have been meeting to denounce the government in Tripoli. Among them were military commanders who have refused Gaddafi's orders to open fire on protesters. We're not naming our reporter for safety reasons.
A prayer for those who died in the name of freedom. These are tribal leaders